At 71, I found out my late husband had a secret life I never suspected. My husband died 6 months ago, and 2 weeks after his funeral, I discovered he had an entire family I never knew existed. My name is Barbara Henley. I'm 71 years old. The man I was married to for 45 years kept a secret so massive that I'm still not sure which parts of our life together were real. Daniel died of a heart attack in March. It was sudden, no warning. He just collapsed while working in the garage one Saturday morning. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. He was 73. We'd been talking about retirement trips we wanted to take, grandchildren's graduations we were looking forward to. We thought we had more time. The grief was overwhelming at first. We'd been married since 1979, met when I was 24 and he was 26. He was a civil engineer, steady and reliable, exactly the kind of man my parents had hoped I'd marry. We had 2 children, built a comfortable life in suburban Michigan, weathered all the normal ups and downs of a long marriage. He was my partner, my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone. Or at least, that's what I thought. After the funeral, I had to go through Daniel's papers to settle his estate. It's a grim task, sorting through someone's financial life. I sat at his desk in the study, going through files, bank statements, insurance policies, all the administrative debris of a life. That's when I found the bank statements for an account I'd never seen before. It was in Daniel's name only. At a bank we didn't use for our joint accounts. I almost didn't open the envelope because I thought maybe it was an old account. Something left over from before we were married. But something made me look. The account had been active until the month he died. And every month for the past 45 years, Daniel had been transferring exactly $2,000 into it. $2,000, like clockwork, from our joint account into this separate account I knew nothing about. Over 45 years, that was over $1 million. Money that came from our household, from the income we both contributed to. Going somewhere I couldn't account for. I sat there staring at those statements, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that maybe Daniel had a gambling problem I never knew about, or maybe he'd been scammed, sending money to some fraudulent scheme, or maybe he'd been blackmailed. I went through every possibility I could think of, except the one that turned out to be true. I kept digging through his files. I found a folder buried in the back of his filing cabinet, behind years of tax returns. Inside were letters. Dozens of letters, spanning decades, all addressed to Daniel at a P.O. box I didn't know he had. The return address was in Ohio, about 3 hours from where we lived. The letters were from a woman named Claire. I opened one of the recent letters from just 2 months before Daniel died. It started with Dear Daniel and was chatty and affectionate, talking about everyday things. Their daughter Emma had gotten a promotion at work. Their son Lucas was having trouble with his teenage daughter. Claire's arthritis was acting up, but she was managing. She mentioned that she was looking forward to Daniel's visit next month, like she always did. Their daughter, their son, Daniel's visit. I read that letter 3 times before the reality of it settled in. My husband had another family, a wife, or at least a long-term partner, 2 children who were presumably around the same age as our children. A whole separate life he'd been living for decades, just 3 hours away. I went through every letter in that folder. The earliest one was from 1979, the same year Daniel and I got married. Claire was pregnant and asking when he was going to tell his family about her, about the baby. She loved him, she wrote. She knew the situation was complicated, but she believed they could work it out. Later letters showed a pattern emerging. Daniel apparently couldn't leave his wife, meaning me, because of his own family obligations. But he promised to support Claire and their children. He promised to be there for them as much as he could. He promised he loved them. The letters painted a picture of a man who visited Ohio regularly, who attended his other children's school events and birthdays when he could, who was a present father and partner to this whole other family, while also being a husband and father to me and our kids. When he told me he was traveling for work, which he did frequently as an engineer, he was apparently spending at least some of that time with them. I found photographs, too. Daniel with a woman who must have been Claire, his arm around her, both smiling at the camera. Daniel holding a baby. Daniel at what looked like a high school graduation, with two young people who had his features. A whole photographic record of a family I never knew existed. The thing that made it worse was how normal it all looked. These weren't secret, shameful pictures. These were regular family photos, the kind anyone would have. Birthday parties, holidays, ordinary moments. He looked happy in these pictures. He looked like a father, a partner, exactly the way he looked in our family photos. I spent days going through everything I'd found, trying to piece together the timeline, trying to understand how this was possible. Daniel had been living two completely separate lives for 45 years. Not an affair that lasted a few months, or even a few years. An entire parallel family that existed for as long as our marriage had existed. The money from that separate account had been going to support them. $2,000 a month, which in the late 70s was substantial, had been going to Claire to help with rent, groceries, children's expenses, all the costs of raising a family. He'd been supporting two households, two sets of children, two women, for 45 years. I thought about all the times Daniel had traveled for work, all the conferences and site visits and training sessions that took him away for days or weeks. I'd never questioned it because that was his job. Engineers traveled. It was normal. Except now I had to wonder how many of those trips were real, and how many were cover stories so he could be with his other family. I thought about the money. We'd always been comfortable, but never wealthy. We'd been careful with our finances, saved for retirement, put our kids through college without taking on too much debt. I'd sometimes wondered why we didn't have more saved given Daniel's good salary, but he handled most of the finances, and I trusted him. Now I understood where the money had gone. He'd been supporting two families on one income and somehow making it work. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not our children, not my sister, not my closest friends. I couldn't figure out how to explain it, how to say the words out loud. My husband of 45 years had another wife and two other children I never knew about. It sounded insane. It sounded like something from a television drama, not something that happened in real life to real people. But I needed to know more. I needed to understand the full scope of what Daniel had been hiding. So I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I looked up Claire's address from the letters, and I drove to Ohio. It took me 3 hours to get there. 3 hours of rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd introduce myself, what I'd ask. But when I pulled up to the address, I just sat in my car across the street, looking at the house. It was a modest ranch house, well-maintained, with a garden in front. Exactly the kind of house Daniel and I lived in. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes before the front door opened and a woman came out. She was about my age, gray-haired, ordinary looking. She got into a car in the driveway and drove away. That was Claire, the other woman in Daniel's life, the mother of his other children. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't introduce myself. I just sat there looking at this house where my husband had apparently spent a significant portion of his life. And then I drove home. I wasn't ready to talk to her. I didn't know what I'd say. I didn't know what I wanted from that conversation. When I got home, I called my daughter Amy. She's 42, a therapist, the kind of person who can handle difficult information. I told her everything. She came over immediately, and we went through all the papers and letters together. She was devastated. Her father, who she'd always admired and loved, had been living this enormous lie her entire life. Amy wanted to confront Claire, to demand answers, to understand how this had been possible. But I wasn't sure what good that would do. Daniel was dead. Whatever explanations existed, they died with him. Claire couldn't tell us why he'd made the choices he made, why he'd maintained two families, why he'd never come clean to either of us about the other. Eventually, about a month after I found the letters, I wrote to Claire. I didn't call because I didn't think I could handle hearing her voice. I wrote a simple letter explaining who I was, that I'd found evidence of her relationship with Daniel after his death, and that I wanted to understand what had happened. She wrote back 2 weeks later. Her letter was careful and sad. She said she'd known about me from the beginning. Daniel had told her he was married when they met, but that his marriage was troubled. He was planning to leave. She'd believed him. She'd waited for him to leave me. When she was pregnant with their first child, she accepted he wouldn't. She said she'd never wanted to hurt me, that she'd hoped I didn't know about her and would never have to know. She said Daniel had been a good father to their children, visiting regularly, present for important moments in their lives. She said she'd loved him for 45 years and was grieving his loss just as I was. Her letter made everything more complicated, not less. She wasn't a villain. She hadn't deliberately set out to destroy my marriage. She was just another woman who'd fallen in love with Daniel and made compromises to keep him in her life, the same way I had made compromises over the years to maintain our marriage. I showed the letter to Amy and to my son Kevin, who by then also knew the truth. Kevin was angry. He wanted to reject his father's memory entirely, to decide that everything Daniel had been to us was a lie. Amy was more conflicted. She said that people were complicated, that her father could have genuinely loved both families. He'd clearly tried to be present for all of us. I didn't know what to think. I still don't, really. Was Daniel a bad person who deliberately deceived 2 women and 4 children for 45 years? Or was he someone who made a mistake when he was young, and then spent his life trying to honor commitments to 2 families? Unable to choose between us? I think about the Daniel I knew, the man who came home from work and helped with dinner, the man who coached Kevin's little league team and attended every one of Amy's piano recitals, the man who brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings and held my hand during difficult times. Was that person real? Or was it all performance? A role he played while his real authentic self was somewhere else. I think about Claire's Daniel, the man who visited Ohio and was equally present for his children there, who supported them financially and emotionally, who built a life with Claire that looked remarkably similar to the life he built with me. Was that person real? Or was he playing a role there too? Maybe both versions were real. Maybe Daniel genuinely loved both of us, genuinely wanted to be a good father to all 4 of his children, and created this impossible double life because he couldn't figure out how to be honest about what he'd done. Maybe he started with one lie and then spent 45 years maintaining it because the truth would have destroyed too many people. Or maybe I'm being too generous. Maybe he was just a selfish man who wanted everything and didn't care about the consequences. Maybe the fact that he never told either of us the truth means he was fundamentally dishonest, that we never really knew him at all. I don't have answers to these questions. I don't think I ever will. Daniel took his reasons and his explanations with him when he died, and I'm left trying to reconcile 2 completely different versions of the man I thought I knew. What I do know is that my marriage, the thing I thought was the bedrock of my adult life, was built on a lie. Every moment we shared was shadowed by this other family he was keeping secret. Every time he said he loved me, he was saying the same thing to someone else. Every family milestone we celebrated, he was missing a parallel milestone with his other children. And the hardest part is that I can't even be purely angry about it, because the Daniel I knew was a good husband in most ways. He was kind and reliable and present for the life we built together. If I hadn't found those letters, I would have died believing I'd had a good marriage, that I'd been loved and cherished by a faithful partner. Ignorance, in this case, might actually have been better than knowledge, but I did find the letters. And now I have to live with knowing that half of my adult life was based on a fundamental deception. I have to look at our wedding photos and our family photos and wonder what he was thinking in those moments. I have to remember conversations we had about honesty and trust and realize the irony of him participating in those discussions while maintaining this massive secret. Claire and I have exchanged a few more letters since that first one. We're not friends, exactly, but we're not enemies either. We're two women who loved the same man and were both deceived by him. She's grieving the loss of her partner just as I am. Her children are grieving their father just as mine are. We're all trying to figure out how to reconcile the person we thought Daniel was with the truth of what he did. I'm 71 years old. Daniel has been dead for 6 months. And I'm still trying to figure out whether the 45 years I spent with him were real, or if they were all just an elaborate performance by a man who was living 2 lives and never fully committed to either one. If there's a lesson in this, I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's that you can never fully know another person. That even after decades of marriage, people can keep secrets that completely redefine your understanding of them. Maybe it's that we see what we want to see. That I missed signs of Daniel's double life because I didn't want to believe they were there. Or maybe there's no lesson at all. Maybe sometimes people do inexplicable things for reasons we'll never understand. And we're left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of a story that doesn't have a satisfying explanation. All I know is that I loved a man for 45 years, and I'm no longer sure who that man actually was. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to reconcile the husband I thought I had with the truth of who he really was. That's all I can do. That's all any of us can do when we discover that the life we thought we had wasn't quite what it seemed.